Okay, great. My name's Terry Bryant. I'm the director of the Whatcom Homeless Service Center at the Opportunity Council, and I chair this group. Welcome you all to this meeting today. It's really awkward to do a lot of introductions on Zoom. I'm sure we've all had that experience where we talk over each other at the same time. So instead, could you please introduce yourselves in the chat and include your contact information so we can update your email addresses for future coalition updates? That would be wonderful if you could update that in the chat, please. And then since I have roofers here, Marisa Shupik is going to help me out by reading our land acknowledgement. Thanks, Marisa.
Hi, everyone. I have to apologize because I don't have this memorized, so I have to read it. So I would like to begin by acknowledging that we gather today on the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish peoples who have lived in the Salish Sea Basin throughout the San Juan Islands and in the North Cascades watershed from the time immemorial. Please join me in expressing our deepest respect and gratitude for our Indigenous neighbors, the Lummi Nation and Nooksack tribe, for their enduring care and protection of our shared lands and waterways.
Thanks, Marisa. I have a little bit of a reprieve, so that's good. The first item on our agenda, oh, and I want to say too that you're welcome to unmute and contribute to the conversation at any time, and I'll try to monitor the chat for questions as we go along too. Our first item is updated resources that may have been affected by COVID-19, and Opportunity Council's Community Resource Center staff have agreed to come and do a bit of a presentation and talk to you about how to keep up to date on those shifting resources. So we have Lisa and Heidi from Opportunity Council joining us. Are you guys ready?
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Hi, I'm Lisa Soni, and I'm the Outreach and Development Manager of Community Services. I'm just going to say a quick hello and then turn it over to Heidi, but I just wanted to introduce Heidi in a new role at Opportunity Council. Even before COVID, we realized that the world of resources is very large and very difficult to manage, and so we created a position that could really be focused on resources and help to curate them, pull them together, and kind of just be solely focused on that aspect for the community. So in April, Heidi Knickerbocker, who was formerly an INR specialist within the Community Resource Center, took on that role. And we're just thrilled because she's just been able to create a lot of really neat things for us. So that's all I'm going to say. I'm going to turn it over to Heidi and let her show you what we've been able to put together.
Okay, great. Like Lisa said, I'm Heidi and I'm the Community Resource Specialist at Opportunity Council. So I'm just gonna pull up my screen and show you a few of the things that we've been working on and hopefully things that may be helpful to you all as you navigate resources. So hopefully you can all see here the Whatcom Asset Building Coalition site. So this is whatcomabc.org. This is where a lot of the resources we're building are going to live and already live. So right here on the home page, you can see the different categories of services listed here, but what I want to show you is our community resources available during COVID-19. So you can easily navigate there from the home page. And it pulls up this page here, which is where we're doing our best to keep up-to-date resources to reflect what's happening among different agencies during this time, where services have changed and are still changing. So we're trying to keep this as up-to-date as possible. We try to put updates that come to us here in this new this week box, so it's easy to find what may have changed since the last time you stopped by the site. On the sidebar here, we've got a few helpful resources. So we'll link to Unified Command, our food and meal guide, which we update as frequently as possible with different meal resources, link to the crisis line, and then a note down here to send updates to me. So if you're ever on the site and see something that's out of date or needs to be updated or is not on the site that should be, please send me an email so we can fix that. And then we just have different categories of resources. So everything from food, utilities, financial resources, housing, community resources and social services, employment, health and hygiene, children and families, and legal. So each of these sections has a variety of different topics and links to hopefully help inform clients of where they can seek resources and how during this time. That is one of the projects we've been working on and are continuing to work on to keep up to date. Another effort that has come out of this new role, hopefully you can all see the CRN page here. So the Community Resource Network is a network of many different social service providers in the community. It's an email list of about 850 different providers. So a platform for information exchange. So we recently have transitioned this network from frequent email updates into one weekly newsletter that goes out each Friday. So all of those newsletters can be found here on the Whatcom ABC site. This is just whatcomabc.org/CRN. And I'll make sure to provide a link in the chat if you're interested. But you can find all of our past newsletters here, and I'll just show you an example of our most recent one. Give you an idea of the kind of content that goes in those newsletters. So each week we have some sort of program highlight that goes kind of in the most central location on the newsletter. So this is a great opportunity to showcase upcoming events or program changes or resources that we want the community to be more aware of. So if you have an idea of something for that, feel free to send it our way and we'll try to feature that. So we've got a couple program highlights usually on that first page. Usually have some updates of things that are new or have changed since the last newsletter. Usually list some community opportunities, so typically webinars, events, classes that are being held in the community, employment opportunities, and sometimes there are different categories, but this is pretty standard for a weekly newsletter. And then on the sidebar here, there's my contact information. So again, please email me any updates that you'd like included in the newsletter. A link to a few different resources like our food and meal guide, some COVID specific resources, and then our newsletter guide down here I wanted to show you. To subscribe to the newsletter so it comes to your inbox each week, just send me an email, communityresources@opco.org, and I'll add you to the email list. And then icon key here, so you'll see in these newsletters there's often a little dollar symbol that denotes something that is an asset building opportunity. So in our partnership with the Whatcom Asset Building Coalition, we've decided to include that icon to highlight those opportunities. A new symbol here usually will denote when something has been updated or changed. So for example, each time the food and meal guide gets updated, you'll see that new symbol so you know something in that guide has changed. And then the 3 and 30 icon is another effort we're working on, is putting out some short 3-question surveys to get feedback from the community and the resource network. So we'll send those out in the newsletter from time to time to solicit feedback from our network on a variety of different topics. For example, we surveyed our CRN group on community resources and community resource guides to get some feedback on what kinds of guides and lists would be helpful as we work toward making more up-to-date resource guides to provide to the community. So we'll have some more of those surveys coming out shortly. So if you subscribe to the newsletter, we'd love your feedback on that. Yeah, that's the newsletter. That's pretty much what I had on my list to talk about. Lisa, did you have other updates you wanted to share?
Do we have another minute or so, Terry, to add a thing or two?
Sure do.
I know you have a tight schedule. Heidi, can you go back one page where the newsletters live?
Yes.
So our last 3 and 30, so it's 3 questions that you can answer in less than 30 seconds, kind of highlighted that the community wants a lot more information around housing. So Heidi's currently working on a housing resource guide. As she mentioned, we love any input that you all have to give, but we're also working on a couple community-wide resource trainings that we hope to roll out in the next couple of months. The first will be just a general how to navigate resources in Whatcom County that Heidi will be putting on for new staff or new individuals to social services. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And then we're going to reach out to some of you all that are here today because we want to bring together some experts on housing and provide a community-wide training that anyone can just log into and learn about the housing system, because we really got a lot of feedback in that survey that it's kind of a realm of mystery for a lot of people who aren't working directly within the housing system. So I'm sure we'll be reaching out to some of you to help us with that if you're willing to participate. We're just really excited. And then on the very bottom of this page, you'll see this button that says Resource Roundtable. And that's another community initiative that Jeff, myself, Heidi, Jeff is our Community Resource Center coordinator, and Christy Sleddy over at the Whatcom Family and Community Network have been working on for a year now. And now we have a little group of us that are really working on developing, how can we develop a robust, technologically advanced resource database that the whole community can buy into and be a part of. So if you want more information about this initiative, you can just give it a quick click there, Heidi, if you don't mind. We've got tons of information about the work that we're doing, and we're looking for partners who are passionate about this work. So our history is here that you can look at, our latest meetings and where the direction that we're going in. Right now, we have 4 goals: a resource database, a higher level talking about community information exchange, our community-wide resource trainings, and obviously outreach, just getting the word out in the community that these resources are available and how to connect to them. So that's what we're doing in a nutshell. And we really, really appreciate the opportunity to share the work and hopefully get you to join us.
Thank you, Lisa and Heidi. I'm seeing a lot of expressions of appreciation for your work in the chat. Are there any questions for Lisa or Heidi before we move on? You could also put them in the chat. I also want to say that when we're not in a pandemic, it's challenging to keep on top of resources that are constantly shifting. So I can't imagine what the lift is like right now, and I just really appreciate the work that you've done.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. You're welcome to stay or peace out. It's up to you.
Okay.
Moving on to our next agenda item. The steering committee sets the agenda in the month prior to our meetings. And since November is National Homeless Youth Awareness Month, we've asked some folks to come and speak to that topic, what the state of homeless youth is right now, what's different during COVID-19, what do you really wish that people knew and understood about homeless youth? And we have Emily Humphrey Krigbaum here joining us from the Bellingham School District. Are you ready, Emily? Great, thank you.
Yes. Hi, everybody. So like Terry said, I'm one of the McKinney-Vento and homeless liaisons for the Bellingham School District. I am curious, I saw in the agenda there's going to be a Q&A, so maybe I'll keep my little spiel short because I think a lot of your questions will be helpful of kind of where to direct my talk. And feel free, Terry, if you want me to redirect anything, you can put it in the chat. So what I do is, as a McKinney-Vento liaison, work to identify students that qualify for homeless support services. So that typically is making sure families and students get to remain at the same school, so have that school stability and help with transportation. So obviously that isn't happening right now. So I think one of the challenges that we face is making sure we're identifying all students that are experiencing homelessness when we're not in the schools. I know for Bellingham, it's been a huge effort and a huge focus on family engagement. So at each building level, staff at all levels are working together to make sure that they are having contact with every student that attends the Bellingham School District to make sure that, one, the remote learning is going okay, as good as it can be, and making sure that folks know about what resources are available. Because with Bellingham School District, we do have assistance for internet, and every student is able to get help with a learning device, so a laptop. And I've just seen a lot of creative things happen to make sure that these kids are able to stay connected and be in an environment that's positive for their learning. Like with McKinney-Vento, I've been able to purchase a lap desk for a student that was couch surfing, so they didn't have room for a desk. So I think what we're trying to do is get really creative to make sure we can make this strange time as successful as possible for our students still. And just kind of FYI for service providers, if any student that your family that you're working with, and they mentioned any difficulties around remote learning with internet and their device or connecting with the school, I'll send to Terry and we can send it out the McKinney-Vento contact list for the county. That's a great place to start to get connected with where to go for help with those things. So I think I'll end it there because I'd love to hear your questions after this so I can, we can talk about those together.
We could go ahead and start with questions. I don't think our next speaker, Riannon Bardsley, is going to be here until 4 on the dot. So this is a good time to ask those questions or put them in the chat.
While we're waiting, I also wanted to say thank you to Lisa and Heidi for the amazing job with that resource directory. I have it linked for the community resources page on the district website. So I think that's just an example of that collaboration that the goal of this project is definitely working and it's super appreciated. Okay, so question from Chris. Do you have a sense of how the number of students without stable housing has changed since last year? So that is a great question. And, to be honest, it's hard to tell at this point, especially we're on the cusp of the eviction memorandum being lifted, which I think that is a scary thought for a lot of folks. So, as of right now, we continue to designate students throughout the year. So at the end of the year, that's kind of when we know the total number of students for that school year. Where my experience of being the third year of kind of being at the beginning of the school year, it does seem to be about the same amount of students. It's not significantly higher to where I would report that. And I think that has a lot to do with the eviction memorandum. And so, I hope that either that gets extended and, having the Opportunity Council's rental assistance has been huge, and also through Salvation Army and Law Advocates. So I haven't seen a huge increase right now, but that doesn't quite mean, unfortunately, that we're in the clear yet. But okay, question from Amanda. I've heard rumors that the school district is considering opening up in-person classes come January. Is that true? If so, do you know what specifically what that would look like? I think that did come from a rumor mill, because that isn't, there's no actual dates confirmed for stage 2 of remote learning yet. So that, you know, I think the district is being really mindful of watching for all the state and health department guidelines for how to move forward and be as careful as possible so we don't have to move backwards. I think that would be the fear. We want to make sure we're moving forward safely and we don't have to do anything repeated. So there isn't a date for opening come January. And I know the district has been trying to be very transparent about, you know, what the plans are. So as soon as more information is known, Dr. Baker releases a message about that, at least for Bellingham. Okay, and then Marissa, are there specific things that are excluded from the funding you can use? Yeah, so as a McKinney-Vento liaison, I can request funds from set aside Title I funds, which are federal. So that, you know, I think that connects us all to know that those funds are quite strict in what you can use them for. They're tied to academic success for a student, and that cannot be used for rent or utilities, unfortunately. So I often use that money to buy clothes for students. Like I said before, a lap desk. So something that will promote a student being able to learn and feel comfortable in their learning environment. Okay, and Barbara, do you see any relief offered from families living doubled up related to ERAP or CARES funding for rental assistance? My understanding of ERAP and CARES was for if you were in rent and arrears. So is that for families that are doubled up? Do you mind expanding on that question, Barbara?
Sure. So I'm thinking about more in a prevention type of manner, that perhaps fewer students would become homeless and have to resort to living doubled up because their family was assisted through the CARES Act or ERAP.
Okay, thank you.
Perhaps it's premature to see any difference in that, but I was just curious if any initial possibilities from benefits of that have been seen.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's would definitely be a really clear cause and effect, like that would, but I kind of like you're saying, it might be too early to know. I think having the eviction prevention or kind of rental assistance more, since there's no evictions, more readily available has just been a huge difference. But I think at the end of the year, when we do have the total numbers of students who were identified McKinney-Vento eligible, we can sort that out by situation. So if a student was doubled up or in a motel or in a program, so that might be able to give us more information then.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I also see here that Chris has put a link to a document in the chat to CARES funding and eviction prevention program information. And we can also, I can ask Jasmine to share that out with the coalition as well. So you can share that widely for anyone who needs assistance.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions or discussion on that?
Can I give one plug before we transition?
Yeah, especially since Riannon isn't here yet.
Perfect. I'll make it long. So with I mentioned if you talk to any families that have students that are needing support with internet or having a working device for accessing remote learning, you can definitely point them in the direction of a McKinney-Vento Liaison or Family Resource Center. They can also, for Bellingham School District, access a request form online through the district website. And they've made a great resources page that lists is it possible to share my screen, Terry? Is that okay? Okay. Okay, so on the district website, the easiest way I find to get to it is on this top bar, the Reconnect Plan, and visit our resources page for more information. You click on that, and these were the kind of buttons I was speaking of before. So it's a great web page to know is here for folks. So if they can just click right on this tech request form and write in the information of what a student might need, and then they'll get contacted directly by technology staff. And there's also this button here that says, I need help. And families, students can submit a request for hygiene items. If they're having food access, they need support with food access or any other needs. I have been definitely encouraging folks to direct their questions towards this, just so we as a district can know what the needs are of students and hopefully, you know, work towards meeting those needs. And so this form has just been really great, and just trying to make sure everyone knows about it.
Thanks, Emily.
Thank you, guys.
So while we're waiting for Riannon to join, I'm thinking maybe we could talk a little bit about the ground floor and what Northwest Youth Services are doing. I know that they couldn't be here today, but Marissa's been partnering with the staff there in an outreach perspective. So Marissa, could you speak to that a little bit and what the ground floor is like?
Yeah. So with ground floor, it's a day youth center for at-risk runaway homeless youth, usually ages 24 and below. They connect with supportive adults. They can get basic needs like food, clothing, and sometimes there's gear available for them to be able to sleep outside. And it is something that can also be used as a meeting place. So we've had times when some of the youth will hang out at ground floor waiting for someone to connect with them for services. I feel like ground floor is something that is really nice for the youth to be able to just kind of get out of the elements, take a moment to breathe, and really try and connect to certain resources that they need. And as far as ground floor's hours and everything, I do know that they're a little bit more careful right now due to COVID. So I'm not exactly sure what their top capacity is per day. A few weeks back, and we all know everything for COVID is changing like every 3 nanoseconds. But a few weeks back, the cap was 10 people at a time in ground floor. So I'm not sure if that's changed recently. But other than that, ground floor is an amazing way for youth to start connecting with people. And it's funny because I actually spoke to someone the other day, and when we were talking about ground floor, they said, oh, so it kind of has the same thing as base camp, where it's like this initial place that you can go and start showing your face and show that you're interested in services. And I was thinking to myself, actually, that's a pretty good way to put it. So I think that's the most I can share on ground floor without getting into like massive nitty gritty that Northwest Youth Services would like to give details on. But hopefully that gives you a pretty good overview. And I can also put Northwest Youth Services website information in our chat. So if somebody's interested, they can look it up.
Thanks, Marissa. Riannon is here. I'm going to bring her to the meeting. Riannon, are you with us?
I am. Hi.
Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
course. Sorry, I'm a couple minutes late.
Not a problem. We were just talking about the ground floor a little bit, trying to fill some time while you were logging in. So Riannon and Bardsley, you were the Executive Director of Northwest Youth Services, and now you're working at Department of Commerce. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So hi, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Riannon Bardsley. I use the she and her pronouns, and was previously, as Terry mentioned, at the at Northwest Youth Services, and I am now the what am I? I am the statewide initiatives manager at the Office of Homeless Youth, which lives in the Department of Commerce. And I've been there since January of last year. So coming up on 2 years now, flies by. Not like time means anything anymore. I thought Monday was Thursday. It wasn't. Today is Thursday. So that's good news. I can jump in a little bit. I don't want to talk too much because I know like talking heads get really old. So I'm going to kind of fly through some things, and then I'm happy to talk more if if people have specific questions about kind of this quick overview of what the Office of Homeless Youth is up to, and kind of what we're seeing across the state when it comes to youth and young adult homelessness. So for those of you who don't know, the Office of Homeless Youth was created by the state legislature in 2015, and the intention was to focus and lead statewide efforts to reduce and end youth and young adult homelessness in Washington state. I believe we were the first Office of Homeless Youth in the country. I now believe that the great state of Oregon has one as well, but much smaller. So I think they have 1.5 staff there. And the Office of Homeless Youth here in Washington, I think we're at 8 staff now. We do a variety of things. Originally the intent was to kind of be a funding body. So there was some funds that were in Children's Administration. There were some that were going through Commerce, and part of what we do now is do contract management for things like CRCs, Hope Centers, outreach programs, young adult shelters, and young adult housing. And we do it across the state. The last funding round, we do funding competitions every 2 years for these funding sources. And the last round, we were really intentional about making sure that we had good geographic coverage. We saw that there were some of the larger counties and cities in the state were getting a lot of the funds. So we did want to make sure that we got to fund some of the smaller communities in the state. And additionally, the grant that I'm working on, which is a HUD-funded grant, the Youth Homeless Demonstration Project, kind of helped with that, as it is focused solely on rural communities, so the 23 most rural communities in Washington state. The other thing that the Office of Homeless Youth does is works on policy. So we don't actually have a ton of power over some of the policies that cover the minor housing programs, because all of that lives within Children's Administration, but we do have a really good relationship with them. And because the Office of Homeless Youth funds some of the programs that house minors, we do have the ability to communicate on behalf of grantees when they're really struggling or when there's inconsistencies that are happening in interpreting policies. So that has been an interesting relationship, and I think has been beneficial for both departments. We also, in terms of our policy and program kind of development work, one of the things that we're really working on practicing more is making sure that these are informed by young people. And it's something that the Office of Homeless Youth has done from the very beginning in terms of partnering with the Mockingbird Society, which is a statewide organization whose primary intention was to improve the way foster care was delivered, but they've also understand that there's an intersectionality with young people who are experiencing homelessness, that those two things often come hand in hand, not always, of course, but that there is some relationship there. And so they have included that as part of their mission as well. So using young people's experiences and expertise to help inform how we develop programs and how we make adjustments to our policies, because oftentimes it's a bunch of, white adults who have not experienced the system sitting in a room making decisions about how to best deliver services. And that doesn't always work. I don't know if any of you have any personal experience with the foster care system or the homeless system, but it doesn't always work for everybody. So it's been quite lovely to hear from young people about what it is that works for them really well and what doesn't work for them. So some of the examples that have come up is actually around like the coordinated entry tool. It is, and you'll hear this nationally too from youth and young adults, but we hear it locally in our own county, Whatcom County, which is where I reside, but also across the state. And that is that the VI SPDAT is trauma-inducing and it doesn't often prioritize young people, and they often don't have a relationship with the person who's asking, and so you're not going to get honest answers. But mostly what we hear over and over again from young people is that it's a traumatizing experience for them, especially when they're already in the middle of crisis. So one of the very first things that we got to do was develop a youth developed youth and young adult coordinated entry tool. And it's possibly the first one in the country. It's hard to tell always. I hate to say stuff like that because I can't necessarily back that up, but from what I hear from our federal TA providers is that there's not really another youth developed coordinated entry tool for youth. So we were able to do that, and we're about 6 months into piloting that in 23 of the counties in Washington State, and we have some additional counties that are wanting to also start piloting it at some point here. So we're excited about that. We also hear from young people about the importance of understanding survival sex, and to destigmatize that, and how often young people are kind of shamed around it, but how it's actually quite common. And for organizations who are working with young people to consider that and to not ignore the real experiences that young people are having in order to survive. And to address it and talk about it and to destigmatize it. Some of the other things that have popped up recently that the Office of Homeless Youth is working on came out of the Mockingbird Summit. So every year, young people, there's a few chapters all over the state, and so they get together and come up with recommendations as they reflect on their experience in systems of care, as we call them. And they came up with a good long list of things that they would like to see us improve. But the ones that the Office of Homeless Youth feel like, so every year we look at these, and some of them are for like children's administration, so they're not necessarily things that the Office of Homeless Youth has control over, but often there are some that we can have influence on or could actually make changes to. So the ones that we are looking at this most recent round, they just had this leadership summit, I think last month, or the month prior, because we're just October 1st, aren't we? Was to establish an intergovernmental task force to identify gaps and barriers for Native youth in accessing state services. We know that Native youth do not access the systems at the rate at which they represent the general population in their communities. So, and also we know that when they do access it, they're not as effective, that they sometimes exit more poorly from these programs at a higher rate. We also know that in Washington State, we have a significant amount of Native youth who enter into the foster care system, who are removed from their tribes, and then they are now like involved in a white dominant culture system that often doesn't work for them nor for their families or their communities. So young people have asked that there's some focus on this. Again, another one that has come up is around police brutality and looking at when and why organizations call police and if there are alternatives. And so one of the things that the Office of Homeless Youth is doing is looking at our guidelines and seeing where we can help grantees make different choices, or at least understand better when and why police are being called. Another one that might be interesting to you all, and you probably see this with some of the other populations that you work with, is ensuring that hygiene and wound care resources are available. This one, of course, is specifically for youth and young adults who exit from the emergency department. So oftentimes people are exited into homelessness, or if they are in poverty and they cannot purchase and they are not given the supplies that they need to take care of their wounds. So making sure that when folks leave, they have the hygiene and wound care resources that they need. And then this one's probably also familiar to you all, is, and what young people have asked for, is improve homeless youth caseworker retention by reducing paperwork. And I bet we could get like a round of applause from the whole crowd on this one. So for any of you folks on the call who have control over this, if you are a funder, if there's any way that you could help reduce the amount of paperwork, if young people are saying that the amount of time that their caseworkers have to spend documenting and doing paperwork reduces the ability for them to have relationships with their case managers. It increases their case manager's stress level, and it decreases their effectiveness in working together. So if there's any way possible to reduce that, please do so. Please consider it. And as an organization, if you can look at your paperwork and get rid of any redundancies, it does make a difference, even though it's not super sexy. People are asking that we consider the amount of paperwork that we ask of our direct service staff. So those are some of the things that we're working on right now. I think I don't want to go over my time. How am I? Get 10. Oh, I'm already over my time, so maybe I'll just keep going. And then there's a whole bunch more that we're working on. I know that a lot of you have received some CARES Act dollars. Thank you for the hustle on that. We are, in a similar boat that you all are in terms of some of us are having to do furloughs at the same time that we're getting a ridiculous amount of additional work that we aren't staffed up for, that we can't staff up for, with ridiculously short timelines. Some of those are from the feds, some of those are from commerce, and we're also trying to be innovative and ensure equity in it. So then we're also asking you to do something new. So I will just say thank you and I'm sorry. Both things are true, but we are trying to take advantage. We know that COVID-19 is disproportionately impacting tribal communities, our Indigenous folks, people of color, African Americans. And so if now, we're way behind on the equity work. And so now is a really good time to start practicing and making sure that the money that we do have is getting to the people that need it the most. And that does mean we need to start doing work differently. So we appreciate that. And I hear from grantees every day who are trying their hardest. And I know that we just have a ton of work to do in that area. So thank you for that. Some new funding really quick, and then I swear I'll stop. Some new funding that we just released, which is really exciting, that Washington State has never done before, is transitional housing beds for minors. Right now, up until recently, until July, we only funded emergency housing, and it was like 30 days. And I don't know if any of you have worked with a 15-year-old or a 16-year-old who has a housing crisis, but 30 days is often not enough. And so having the ability to have transitional housing beds that are funded by the state is really cool. And so we've got those out. And I don't know if Northwest Youth Services is on the phone or not, but I think Whatcom County got some. So that's exciting. I think just a handful of organizations received them around the state. Again, 15 beds total. And I do believe that Northwest Youth Services was one of those organizations that received transitional housing beds. We also made some investments in behavioral health, because we know that is something that many young people are struggling with, and that our current behavioral health systems are not youth friendly and stigma inducing and can be traumatizing. And so the state has added some funding to help with those issues. And then some centralized diversion fund went out as well recently, which I don't know too much about, but I can always find out more if people want to hear about that. And I'm going to stop.
Thanks, Riannon. I really appreciate your update. I really also appreciate acknowledging that service providers are asked to push a lot of money out really quickly, really fairly, really appropriately and targeted, and without always a sufficient amount of service staff to do so. So it helps to know that we're all feeling that pain.
Yeah, there's not enough admin support for it either. So
yeah. So that really helps. And another thing, I have a question for you, and I would encourage anyone to put questions in the chat for the time that we have you. But my question is that I'm really interested in the evaluation tool for coordinated entry that you mentioned. And I'd love it if you could share anything that you learn about alternatives to the VI, and curious if the criticisms of the SPDAT is the tool we use to make prioritization decisions and coordinated entry for homeless individuals. If those same criticisms applied to the transitional youth tool that's specific, or just the VI, because there's two versions.
And they both have gotten poo-pooed by young people. Yeah. I'm happy to, if I could just pull it up real quick, if I have the ability to find it. I haven't gotten any more skilled at organizing over the past 2 years. Here we go. So it's really simple. It's very relationship based. It is diversion is something that young people wanted to see happen throughout. So from the very first moment that staff were interacting with young people, that we are thinking about diversion all the way through, even once they've gone through the CE system, even once they've been prioritized, even once they're working with a case manager on trying to locate a rapid rehousing, that underneath that at all times, we are also thinking about diversion. So that was really big, that just because diversion doesn't work at first doesn't mean that as you're working with a young person over the next 2, 3, 6 months, that diversion can't work later on, but that we are consistently attempting to divert them out of a expensive, sometimes ineffective, sometimes harmful homeless housing system. So that was something that was kind of called to the surface over and over again. Some of the questions, there's really 7 questions, Terry. Do you want me to read them to you?
Sure.
Okay. And I'm happy to send this out too. Are your current, within the past 2 weeks, right? Because we're still living in a HUD world with 14 days. So are your current physical and emotional needs been met? have your current physical and emotional needs been met? So it's yes or no. Are you currently, again, in 2 weeks, in physical danger or under emotional distress? Has your housing ever been disrupted due to your race, gender identity, sexuality, or religion? Do you have any natural support systems? And then it goes through, there's a little more on that one. Do you have any minors in your care currently, or do you expect to soon? Have you ever or do you currently receive supports while in school? Could include things like IEPs, so individual education plans, a 504 plan, wraparound services, a behavioral health plan or behavior plan, supports from DDA, which is Developmental Disability Administration. And then the last question is, have you received services from or been in any of the following systems: foster care, adoption, mental health, drug and alcohol treatment, or the court systems?
There's a lot of those questions about things that aren't usually touched on in our system, so that's really valuable. And I just
Some of the things that we did find, Terry, just so you know, is that the results were similar. So the people that were scoring high, the young people that were scoring high in the VI SPDAT were also scoring high in this, but we weren't having to ask such personal traumatizing questions.
Yeah, that's good to know. So we have such a good group today. I want to give this some context to, you know, community members or other providers who aren't in the coordinated entry world. What coordinated entry is individuals who are experiencing homelessness can present for services. And the theory is you have one application for multiple service providers. So you could come and apply, and at Opportunity Council, let's say, but that's not the only place you could access it. And you would not have to apply again at the YWCA or at Lydia Place or at Northwest Youth Services. It's one application. And what we're talking about with this tool and the questions is it's standardized method for assessing a person's vulnerability. And in this context, that vulnerability means how likely are you to die while experiencing homelessness? And the VI SPDAT has kind of been, I don't want to call it the gold standard because it's widely criticized, but it's evidence-based and it's widely used. And we know that there are some issues with it. Building Changes is an organization that came out with a study last year talking about some racial disparity that are caused by the VA SPDAT. So I'm always very excited when I hear about new tools being developed, because what I don't want to do is make a tool based on what my biases might be that would unduly influence the tool. So there's some perspective there. The other thing I want to just mention really quickly is the diversion that Riannon mentioned. Diversion is almost a new model of service. And I'm so happy to hear you talk about that, because what coordinated entry has shifted towards that too. And really what it is, it's a problem-solving conversation, right? So we're not sitting a household down, youth or not, and asking a bunch of questions where we check boxes, right? Because we need it for the system. Instead, what we're having to do is we're having a conversation with the person. What are your needs? What do you bring to the table? What are your strengths? So we're really shifting away from what I kind of felt like was an intake factory and having a more trauma-informed, meaningful conversation with the clients. And the group that's doing this work the most is our Community Resource Center. That's Heidi, that's Lisa's team. And we're really looking at diversion as not a program, although there are programs specifically for this type of conversation, but every service provider that they come into contact with is having the same kind of trauma-informed and problem-solving conversation. Mm-hmm. And there's a question for you, Riannon. Do you have recommendations for how we can be successful in getting youth representatives to the table in local efforts around youth homelessness, i.e. the Coordinated Entry Governance Committee? And that question's from Barbara Johnson-Vinna.
Hey, Barbara. I would say the first thing to do is to figure out what your compensation policy is and your process. So if you're asking young people to, like we all are getting paid, right? Well, maybe not every single one of us, but for most of us, we are getting paid to show up to these meetings, and we're getting paid to share our expertise. And young people or anybody with lived expertise should also be getting compensated. So the state has compensation. We have a youth action board we call the Youth for Youth Board, and it's statewide. And we have a stipend policy, and we're able to compensate young people at a fairly good rate. So we don't pay by the hour. It's a different kind of stipend situation, but it basically breaks down to about $20 an hour. But if the meeting is only an hour, then they actually would get $40. So it just kind of depends on how you set it up. But so I would say that make sure you are compensating young people, and then I think, it's a really interesting question. I would say have more than one. Just having one token young person is not going to do it. So getting young people with lots of different experiences to help inform the process, I think, is really important. And then it is also really helpful. What I hear from young people is to have somebody who can spend time helping them understand our jargon and to understand the policies, because sometimes what happens is when we bring young people in, or bring anybody in who doesn't speak this language, because we are speaking a language here, it's about making sure that there's cultural competency, but that goes both ways. And it's not just about getting a young person to be culturally competent about us, but actually the people at the table also need to be culturally competent about the young people. And so I think it's a both. It needs to be in place for that to be successful. Also, I meet with young people on Sundays. We have board meetings on Sundays, and we have board meetings after hours. And if we really truly want to engage people, so let me actually back up. If we truly want to build effective systems, then we need to be engaging people who access the systems. And in order to do that, we need to work outside of our typical 9 to 5, and they need to be compensated. That was the long answer.
But a good answer.
Very helpful. Thank you, Riannon.
Yeah, thanks, Barbara.
Any other questions for Riannon while we have her?
Right on time, even though I went over.
It was perfect. Thank you very much, Riannon. Really appreciate your time this afternoon.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, next item on our agenda is COVID-19 specific funding opportunities. Can you speak to that, Barbara?
Sure.
Thank you.
So there are 3 main COVID-related grants, or actually 2 out of 3 are specific to COVID. The 3rd grant just happened to come out at around the same time as the other 2. So I wanted to give you the quick rundown on what kind of funding is coming into the community and how it can be used for both the COVID efforts, as well as for those experiencing homelessness or at risk of becoming homeless. So the first grant that we received was the COVID-19 Outbreak Emergency Housing Grant, and that was for $905,821. This was the original grant that we used to assist the drop-in center, the Lighthouse Mission Drop-in Center, from relocating from their previous location so that they would have additional capacity, not only to add more people to be able to receive shelter through their agency, but also so that there would be adequate space for social distancing. So that grant will end as of December of this year, the end of December. And then we received a second grant, which is referred to as the Commerce Shelter Grant. And that grant is for about $1.1 million. This grant was not actually related to COVID originally. It happened to come out, as I said, during COVID, but it had been money set aside by the legislature even before COVID hit, from my recollection. So that grant runs from August 1st of 2020 to June of 2023. And the funding has been used for expansion of our shelter bed capacity in Whatcom County. So we have new shelter beds that we've been able to support. As I mentioned at base camp, they added about 110 new beds to be able to accommodate more individuals. And in addition to that, we set aside about $400,000 for a request for proposals for additional shelter beds in the community. So that RFP went out and we've received 2 applications for it. One was from Lydia Place, and they proposed adding 2 units through motel stays for families with children, which would run for a full year. So they would reserve those 2 rooms specifically for that purpose throughout the year. And then the other RFP proposal that we received was from the YWCA, and their proposal is to create 5 additional shelter beds for women. And I believe there's some, Chris, can you help me out here a bit? Because I think there was something specifically about the population they were targeting.
Yeah, they're going to be for senior women.
That's right.
Which we're calling 55 plus. So I don't know if you want to call that senior, but we're saying 55 plus.
Yeah.
Kirsten can maybe give a little more.
Yeah. So
yeah, I think you're correct. It's 55. Yeah.
50. Oh, here's, I couldn't see you on here.
That's okay.
Yeah. So the grant will pay for the creation of those beds as well as the operations. So that's exciting. Any questions about that before I move on? Okay, and then the third is our most recent COVID-related grant, and this is referred to as the Emergency Solutions Grant. ESG, as it's commonly known, is federal funding passed on to communities throughout the United States by HUD. So it's a little bit trickier to administer because it's related. It is a HUD grant, but they did make quite a few exceptions to this particular grant because it's specific to COVID. So we received 2 allocations, or will be receiving 2 allocations from Commerce for a total of about $2.5 million. And that's for the period of July 1st of this year. And it will run through September 30th of 2022. So it's a significant amount of funding for a fairly lengthy period. So this grant, though, as I mentioned, it's a little bit different from the standard ESG because it's specific to prepare for and respond to coronavirus. And it's for individuals and families who are homeless or receiving homeless assistance. And it's also to support additional homeless assistance and prevention activities to mitigate the impacts created by coronavirus. So 10% of the grant is designated for youth and young adults and their programming and services. So we'll be working with Northwest Youth Services to find out how the grant can best support our youth in as related to coronavirus. 100%, or excuse me, 50%, the eligibility requirements include that those served have 50% of the area median income and under, are at imminent risk or at risk of homelessness, or are literally homeless. And one good piece of news is that the fair market rent requirement is suspended, at least temporarily. So that will make it a bit easier to get rental assistance out the door for our case managers. ESG has been known to have pretty low a pretty low standard for rental assistance that they will pay. Previously, in fact, we had in our last emergency solutions grant a few years ago, we had a challenge spending out the grant because of that factor. So that was a relief for Whatcom County because our rents tend to be quite high. And then the interventions funded are quite, they're pretty widespread. The only one that cannot be funded that we typically see with these type of grants is permanent supportive housing. So ESG cannot be utilized for that purpose. It can be used for emergency shelter, and that includes temporary emergency shelter, acquisition of property for shelter, renovation, operations, and services. It can be used for street outreach, case management, rapid rehousing, which in this case will be limited to 3 to 12 months maximum. And that includes prevention to reduce contracting or further preventing the spread of the virus. It can also fund HMIS, which is our data system for lead activities, and then it includes a number of miscellaneous items such as hazard pay for direct service staff, landlord recruitment, adaptation of coordinated entry policies and procedures so that we can address social distancing measures or increased demand. And that is essentially what it covers, a wide range of activities. So presently, we're working with our partners in the city of Bellingham to decide how to strategically use this grant funding to keep people at risk or who are experiencing homelessness safe. So, any questions about that? I'm sorry, my voice is so raspy. I think I need a drink of water and I don't have any.
There was a question and an answer in the chat that I'll just share out for everyone. Randy asked, are the shelters open during COVID? And Chris answers that, yes, the base camp funding is to support better beds that allow for safe spacing and more storage. The Lydia Place units will be 2 separate motel rooms, 1 household each, and the YWCA beds will be set up with spacing and some barriers between them to comply with COVID safety. Any other questions for Barbara?
Okay, so we'll look forward to this funding rolling out in the community and hope having a huge impact on how we can address this issue. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara.
You bet.
Okay, our next item is nominations for the steering committee. So there's a group that meets every month that this group doesn't, that includes members from this group, that does things like set the agenda for the next meeting, sets priorities, it helps to inform the strategic plan to end homelessness. And we have a lot of vacancies on that board right now. I had sent out with the agenda what our rosters look like, so you can see what the vacancies are. I can also put them on my screen here. And this is a time I was hoping to have encourage some discussion about potential nominees or folks who are interested in participating. It's a 4-year term and it meets every other month for about an hour and a half, and it's much like this right on Zoom. Let's share my screen here. Having a technical issue, I'm sorry. Hang in there. Is there anyone from steering that's attending today that could talk a little bit about what their experience is like? Okay, did I figure it out? Can you see a list of the roster? Yeah, okay. So we have some space open for specific representation. So we need someone representing mental health, a housing agency, homeless youth, substance abuse, criminal justice, Native American community, business community, housing and healthcare integration, faith-based service provider, veterans, employment services, and most importantly, I want to say our group is starving for some guidance from people with lived experience of homelessness. And I bet that's what Barbara's question for Riannon was getting at earlier, is like, how can we encourage that participation? And to Rhiannon's point, even this meeting itself can be a barrier, because I think dinner at the Mission is around 4:30, and it's 4:43 right now. So I would be interested in discussion or brainstorming around ways that we can encourage that participation. Any thoughts? Would anyone like to nominate someone to join us on steering?
Terry, if we have someone in mind but would like to speak to them before we nominate them, and maybe we should have done that ahead of this meeting, can we loop back with you? What is the process for that?
Yes, so the charter says that our steering committee election to include new membership happens in November. So I think that if you want the opportunity to speak to others and suggest them, I guess send it to by email, and then in our November meeting we can discuss those candidates.
Send to you or to as the chair? Is that...
Yeah, and me or the email on our agenda, which I think might be Chris Pollock or Jasmine. Either one of the three of us will definitely get those included in the next steering agenda.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Are there any updates from any other partners that you'd like to share about things that your agencies are doing or noticing? Agency updates? Okay, there's a question in the chat from Marisa asking how folks will access the shelter services that we mentioned earlier. The answer from Chris is new shelter programs, Lydia Place and YWCA will be working with coordinated entry for referrals. And the base camp run by Lighthouse Mission, of course, is low barrier night by night. So people need only present there and request shelter. Should we move on from partner updates? We have some time for public comment. If you want to put them in the chat, I'd be glad to read them, or may unmute yourself to share. Okay. Any last thoughts before we adjourn? Barbara, you're muted. Did you want to say something?
Yes, there's one more comment in the chat box.
Oh, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. From Cliff, is that the one you're thinking, Barbara? Cliff says the rental assistance staff at Opportunity Council have been phenomenal. So I'll definitely pass that on, and Debbie's team will probably be glad to hear that as well. And Helen says, thanks, there's a lot of information today.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, this is Randy, and I'm blind and I have MS. And I wasn't actually living on the streets, but when I was trying to find housing with these disabilities, it was very difficult. And I couldn't help but notice through sitting through this meeting today that there wasn't any mention of disability services. So is there a disability committee or chair or, you know, somebody out there to help people with disabilities navigate the housing system?
That's a really great question. I don't have the answer off the top of my head immediately. No, there isn't a committee specific to disabilities, but that's a good idea.
Maybe that's why I've been called to this meeting.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here.
Yeah.
I think those barriers would be really important to be represented in the steering committee. Barbara, can you think of a role that would fit with our current vacancies?
I am sure there must be one for health or medical. I don't have the list in front of me.
Yeah. Randy, did you share your contact information in the chat earlier?
I did. Yeah.
Great. Can I follow up with you later?
Yes, that'd be great.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Anything else before we close today? All right. Well, thank you all very much for being here. I know it was short notice this month, so I'm really appreciative of your attendance, and we'll get better ahead of it next time. Next meeting, December 3rd. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Terry.
Thanks, Terry.
Thanks, Terry.
Thanks, Terry.
Thank you, Terry. Yeah, I should check on that, see if they got a spot.